south side of Chicago. My dad was a mailman. My mom raised us. I learned get up early, work hard, stay humble. And I took one programming course in college at Lewis College, Lockport, Illinois, next to the state pen. It was the Harvard of the Midwest. They only had one programming course back then. And then Illinois Bell hired me, taught me how to program. I was 24 years old, living at home. And I got a call from a guy, Bobby Guy Stevenson, Jimmy, who was a recruiter for Cutler Williams. And he had an offer. They had an office in Detroit, a consulting firm. Come, we're going to open an office in Chicago. We'll move you right back. I had never been on an airplane. And I just wanted to go on an airplane. So I came, he hired me. I worked for them for 4 years. And I was at American Motors on an engagement, and there was a man, Marty Mutz, ran the data processing department. And one day, he gave me a book about this size. He said, Jack, I want you to read this book, do what's in it, and I'll do business with you. And the title of the book was How to Incorporate for $29.95. And I started in 1976. And over 26 years, we built it to 1,800 people throughout America. I competed against Jim Growney. His margins were much better than ours out of Rochester. And Jim Growney sold the business to a place called Cyber. And in 2002, I sold the business to Cyber. And the chairman of the board was Bobby Guy Stevenson, the guy who brought me from Chicago to Detroit. Amazing story. So I had never belonged to a country club. It's outside of Chicago. There were no country clubs. And when you're running a business, you know, you don't have time for that. And so a week before I sold, Gene Miller of Comerica, Lloyd Royce of GM, sponsored me into Bloomfield Hills Country Club, the cat's meow. And they took me under their wing when they found out I sold the business. They said, you've ended a glorious chapter. God has another chapter for you. Read, listen, and pray. Give it a year. And I was faithful for 6 months and then started something called Trust in Us, an executive search firm. And I've come to realize that this chapter is all about encouraging people. So I was golfing with a very good friend, Mike Feasy, the president of WJR, 10 years ago. And I said, Mike, you need something positive on JR. You got Rush Slimeball every day. That's what my dad would call him. Okay.
He was a mailman.
Yes.
He did work for the federal government.
He was the oldest Democrat in the world. He lived till 94. The only thing the man couldn't do was when the bill came, he couldn't get the hand in the pocket. Biggest mistake he ever made, Mike, was he voted Republican once. He voted for Bonzo one time, Ronald Reagan. But I said, you got Rush Limbaugh, you got Sean Hannity, you got Dr. Laura, Mark Levin, all of this screaming. You need something positive. He said, well, like what? I said, well, you should have one show a week where you highlight one person and let them tell their story to inspire people. He said, well, like who? I said, I'll send you some names. I never said I should be the host. I had never been on the radio, Don. Never. And so I wrote down my hero, Ernie Banks, Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame, John McCain, Dennis Archer. I didn't know these people. And he called me back a week later and he said, I love the idea, and I think you'd be great as the host. And 10 years later, over 500 shows, 500 phenomenal guests, I'm not the host. I'm the beneficiary. for a Mike Timmis to call and say, Jack, a man, Steve Silver's flying up to meet with me. You should have him on the show. So we call each other. We meet at a hotel, a restaurant. I learn about his story. I do research. Then we do the show. It's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's a vitamin every week. Nick Vujicic. He's been on 3 times. First time he was 23. Second time 26. I had him back for the 500th show on January 4th. He's now 32. They don't have the numbers for 2014 yet, but in 2013, he reached 6% of the world's population. That's over 400 million people. He also reached that year 70 million people in Thailand, but he doesn't count that because you can't really talk about God that openly in Thailand. Australian kid. Mom was a nurse, dad was a minister. First child, mom's pregnant, 3 sonograms, everything is fine. Nick comes out, he has no limbs. I don't mean stumps, I mean no limbs. Nick, Vujicic, life without limbs. He's the limbless evangelist. He's got a little 7-inch, he calls it his chicken bone right here. He's married. Has a little 2-year-old Kiyoshi. Just a week or 2 ago, they found out they're having another child. When he was 23, he tells me, if you take the word disable and you add a G and an O in front of it, you get God is able. That's at 23. And he says, we're all disabled. Some physically on the outside, all of us internally. All God has is broken people, disabled people, to do great things. Whenever I've had somebody on that's had something awful happen to them, in his case, I said, Nick, for the first 15 years of your life, you hated God, you wanted to commit suicide. He said, think about it, it's kind of hard to do when you don't have any arms or legs. And I said, if God came today and said, I will give you these arms and legs that you begged me for, your choice, do you want them? What would you say, Nick? 26-year-old kid. He said, Jack, let me tell you a story. He said, I was in Liberia 6-8 months ago, speaking to about 20,000 people, hot summer night, on a hill. They're all sitting on a hill. And in that country, if you're born with a blemish, they end your life. And in the first row is the dictator of the country. So I'm speaking, and I see this woman coming from the top of the hill with a blanket, very hot evening, coming through the crowd for like 30 minutes. And she gets right to the front, to the stage, comes, puts the blanket down, opens the blanket, and holds up her infant son, who was missing an arm. And the crowd goes crazy. Here's the dictator. She has sentenced her son to instant death. So he says, I quit speaking, and I go and hug the baby. And he's got the ability to go down and pop up on this little chicken bone. So he says, I hug the baby. And then I get up, and I start to tell the crowd how special this baby is to God, and how this baby's going to change Liberia, and how this baby's going to be the most famous Liberian of all time. And Jack, I'm happy to say that in the last 8 months, that country has not murdered a child because of a blemish. And if I had the arms and the legs, it would have never happened. So God, no thanks. I don't want the arms and the legs. If it be true that we have to be God's arms and legs, I've never met a man that does that better than Nick Vujicic, who was born with no arms and no legs.
Bob Woodruff took over for Peter Jennings, WABC, and a lot of these guys, we don't know them in any other context. But tell us about Bob Woodruff.
Well, he grew up in Bloomfield Hills. He was teaching law in Beijing. And in the Tiananmen Square uprising, CBS needed a kind of a reporter, so they contacted him and said, could you do some reporting for the uprising? That's how he got into the network business. And then, as you said, Steve, he took over for Peter Jennings. On January 3rd, 2006, he's at the top of the world. His wife Lee, 4 children, they have it all. Looks to kill. He has a face for TV. I have a face for radio. Okay. Finally, I agree with one thing I say.
And a voice for radio.
Yeah. So 26 days later, January 29th, 2006, he's in Baghdad on assignment. And he's in a tank going down a street. Bomb goes off. He loses half his head. He's in a coma. His wife Lee was down in Orlando with their 4 children. The president of ABC hears, calls Lee. Lee, sorry, there's been an injury. We're going to fly you immediately to New York. Then we're going to fly you over to Lansdorf in Germany. Bob's been injured. He's okay, he's been injured. So she's there with him every day, and he's a vegetable. And all the doctors say he's in a coma, he will be a vegetable the rest of his life. And they bring him over to Walter Reed. And Lee would come at 6:30 every morning just to be with him. And on the 35th day, at 6 o'clock in the morning, he wakes up. Nobody's in the room. And he's sitting up, and in walks his wife at 6:30. And he looks at her and he says, Lee, where have you been? And she said, I didn't know whether to hug him or hit him. But he couldn't. They had 2 5-year-old daughters, twin daughters. And the wires were messed up. So the little girls had to teach their dad that this is the fork and this is the knife. Daddy, that's the cup and this is the glass. It was all mixed up. I asked him, I said, let's go back to that January 29th. That morning, God says, hey, if you go in that tank, here's what's going to happen to you, Bob. Your choice. God put me in the tank. That couple has now raised tens of millions of dollars through concerts by Tony Bennett, et cetera, the boss, for these internal head injuries that so many of our great soldiers have come back with. So that's become their mission in life. And he and his wife Lee have published In an Instant, A Family's Journey of Love and Healing. And what I took away from him the most was God is in control. God has a plan for each of us. His plan is always greater than our own plan.
So as Jack looks forward into his life, and as you listen to what God is saying to you at this stage of life, like many of us are trying to listen to what God is saying to us at our stage of life, what are you hearing, and what are you planning? This is an unscripted question.
Yes. Well, this current chapter definitely has been and is, he wants to use me to encourage people. And Mike Feasy, the man that gave me the show and a phenomenal friend, told me a few months ago, he said, Jack, the time has come now for you to tell people about these people and tell your story. And God sends us angels every day. Mike Timmis used the phrase yesterday, divine providence. We have to be angels. He wants us to be angels every day. To help say something nice to the cleaning person or to the child bagging at the supermarket or to your minister or your priest or your rabbi or to the valet guy at the country club. Do something nice. Do something special for your grandchildren. Spend time with them. Listen to them. And in turn, God gives us angels all the time. He uses us. At the DIA a couple years ago, there was an exhibit of paintings about God and Christ. And one of the paintings was by Rembrandt. And the painting was a door. And on this side of the door was God. And on this side of the door was an old man. And here's a doorknob. On this side of the door, there ain't no doorknob. And what Rembrandt was saying is, God's here. But he can't open the door without us knocking and opening the door. He's here. We've got to listen to him. He wants to help us every day. And he's got to wake up some days and think, what did I do? Give these people freedom and free will with what's going on in the world today. He needs warriors. And as Nick says, we're all broken people. But that's all he's got to work with. And he's done his best work with the broken people, using the broken people. So that's my role. That's our role.
You have a terrific prayer by Mother Teresa that you would like to use to close us.
Yes.
Would you please do that?
First, if you go to anythingispossible.
This was my job, by the way, but I blew it.
Anythingispossible.biz. And there's a little icon for archive shows, and every show is archived. Okay? Anythingispossible.biz. Mother Teresa, who Mike and Nancy met, spent time with in Calcutta. Very small room was her abode. She had a little bed, little chest, and two things on the wall. One was a crucifix, and the other was a poem. The poem is entitled, Do It Anyway. It goes like this. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Today's world, people will cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build it anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, people may be jealous. People will be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will forget tomorrow. CJ, in business today, the good you did this morning, they done already forgot it at noon. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and God. It never was between you and them anyway.